Welcome, everyone. I'm Rob Ulmer. I'm Dean of the Greenspun College of Urban Affairs. It's great to have you here. How about just kind of a warm welcome, applause for the Presidential Debate Lecture Series? Yeah, so this is our launch. We're really excited about it and really indebted to the UNLV Presidential Debate Campus Engagement Committee, the Greenspun College of Urban Affairs, and the University Libraries that are funding the taping of this series, and really excited to launch this lecture series as we move forward and look forward to the October debates. Today we have Dr. David Zarefsky here, Professor Emeritus from Northwestern University. You're really in for a treat. He is a giant in the area of political communication, argument, speech communication, as it was, and really somebody that the rest of us in the field measure ourselves to, look up to, and is really the foundation of a lot of the ideas that you're going to hear about today in terms of argument and debate. He's been a debater himself as a student and taught debate at Northwestern University. He was the dean of the School of Speech at the time. It's communication now. Is that correct, Dr. Zarefsky, at Northwestern University? And he's won literally every award and served in every major position in our field. He was the president of the National Communication Association. For many of the communication students here, you go to that conference, he's been the president of that. Also the Rhetoric Society of America, I think twice or three times. Twice. Are you up for a third time, David? No, not that you know of. He's won the Distinguished Award for Scholarship by the National Communication Association. I mean, really, I could go on and on. Written books. Many of our public speaking students here will be instructed directly from him as we use his text in our Introductory to Public Speaking course. Incredible. And myself, it was really exciting for me to have the opportunity before this lecture series, and this is what these kinds of opportunities and engagement opportunities and speaking opportunities open up for us. I've been a big fan, I guess, of, fan is a good expression, of Dr. Zarefsky my entire career as well. I learned about argument and communication and audience from much of his writing and speaking. I used his work in my master's paper and in my dissertation and subsequent articles. And he's somebody that I've really kind of lived up to and tried to think about when I'm constructing arguments or giving presentations. And I think people in the communication field really feel this way. Interestingly enough, though, Dr. Zarefsky, I'll tell you that a very good friend of mine and colleague, David Henry, when I first became dean of the college, looked me square in the eye and said, "You're no David Zarefsky." And I thought to myself for a minute, well, I hadn't met you, but I wanted to kind of give myself a chance to meet you, eye you up, get a sense of what I'm up against. But that's what we're talking about with David Zarefsky. We're talking about somebody that we measure ourselves against in this field. We're really proud to have him here today talking about the Obama-Romney debates. With no further ado, Dr. David Zarefsky.
Very much. Thank you, Dean Ulmer, for that extremely kind and generous introduction. I'm delighted to be here in what promises to be a swing state in the presidential election, in what may be the epicenter of the decision about which party controls the U.S. Senate in January, and at the site of one of the 2016 presidential debates. If you put all those things together, you should understand why people are excited and why attention and energy are being focused at UNLV on the presidential debates in general, and why this lecture series was put together. I feel very honored to be the initial lecturer in the series, and I was asked to talk about what I thought was most interesting about the Obama-Romney debates 4 years ago. But I want first to do two things: to say a little bit about the development of presidential debates generally, for those of you that are not yet initiated into the study of them, and second, to talk about the problem of the incumbent and the challenger in these debates. Presidential debates are newer than we might think. They don't go back to Lincoln and Douglas. Those were debates for a Senate seat from Illinois. Presidential debates began in my lifetime, in my conscious lifetime. The first ever was in 1960 between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. People had been talking for some time about the virtue of having debates, but a whole batch of things came together in 1960 that made them possible and that convinced both candidates that it was in their strategic interest to debate. There were no debates in the next 3 elections, for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons was a legal reason. The equal time law required that if television networks made time available for debates between the 2 major candidates, they had to do the same thing with all candidates for the same office. The Prohibition Party candidate, the Vegetarian Party candidate, and so on. That had been suspended just for the 1960 election. But in the mid-70s, there was a ruling that said that if there was what was called a bona fide news event, sponsored by somebody else, some third party, the networks could cover that without running afoul of the equal time requirement. In jumped the League of Women Voters and said, we'll be happy to sponsor such debates. And in 1976, again for idiosyncratic reasons, both Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter thought it would be to their advantage to engage in debates. In 1980, there was a good deal of dickering about whether there would be any debates, and there ended up being only one week before the election. But by 1984, debates had become institutionalized, and if there's any single factor that institutionalized them, it was that Ronald Reagan, the incumbent president, who was way ahead in the polls and who had no strategic reason to agree to debate, readily agreed to participate in debates against his challenger, Walter Mondale. And there have been debates in every presidential election since. The few occasions when any candidate has talked about maybe not participating in the debates, as George H.W. Bush briefly did in 1992, as John McCain briefly did in 2008, the negative reaction to that possibility was so great that they quickly backtracked, and it's fair to say that debates have now become an established part of the general election process. In fact, they punctuate the election. There have been changes in format over the years. Originally, there was a panel of journalists that would ask questions, and the candidates would have very short periods of time to respond to those. In recent years, we have relied upon either a single moderator or a town hall format in which questions have come from presumably undecided voters making up the studio audience for the debates. There have also been changes in the length of time that people had to respond and whether there were follow-up questions in the presence of vice presidential debates and so on. But the basic form of the debates has not changed very much at all. There are, of course, competing interests in the debates. The candidates are interested primarily in winning the election, and so their interest is using the debates to seize and hold a comparative advantage over their opponent. The sponsors believe that the function of the debates is to enlighten the public, to inform the citizenry about the issues, and to increase interest in the campaign. And for many of the voters in the audience, the debates orient them to the campaign. If they have not been campaign junkies paying attention all along, it's the debates that first establish their interest in the general election campaign. They're looking for easily digestible information, for familiarity with the candidates as people, and for an entertaining and engaging experience since particularly in recent years they have the option of watching many other things on television instead. Well, these interests don't always align properly. The debates are better in the moments when they do. Now, one problem that was noted early on, back in the 60s and early 70s, was the problem of the incumbent in a presidential debate. Any of you who've read the brief piece that I had posted on the website are familiar with this. People would argue that an incumbent would never agree to debate. Why? Because to get the challenger on the same platform with the incumbent would suggest equality and would sacrifice the advantage that the incumbent possessed. Also because the incumbent would realize that the problems and the issues are far more complicated than could be talked about in a debate format. And also because the incumbent's record would be better known, and so what gain is there to let the challenger get up and talk about his record on the same stage? Well, when Ford agreed to debate Carter, people said, well, that doesn't change things. There's special factors in this case. Ford was not elected. He's behind 30 points in the polls. We really shouldn't look at him as an incumbent. When Carter agreed to debate Reagan in 1980, people said, well, he couldn't really turn that down after debating as the challenger 4 years before. But people gradually came to realize that the problem of the incumbent did not stop the incumbent from participating in debates, but it represents a constraint on the incumbent. And if you go back and study the whole run of debates, which I understand some of you are doing this semester, you will see that particularly in the first debate, on several occasions the incumbent has run into problems. And they're the problems that were identified by the people who said, well, an incumbent will never debate. But something new has happened, and that is the challenger also encounters problems in a debate. These are of more recent origin. They relate to the fact that we have changed the system of selecting delegates to the national conventions. In 1968, for example, when Humphrey and Nixon were the candidates, there was a grand total of 15 presidential primaries. That's it. In the other 35 states, the delegates to the convention were selected by the party organization leaders, often well in advance. Well, in an attempt to democratize the process, we now have almost universal primaries and caucuses in which the public participates. And one of the things that we know empirically is the primary voters are more extreme ideologically than the general election voters. Democrats are more extreme to the left in the primaries, Republicans are more extreme to the right. Which means that for a challenger to prevail in the primaries, to become the candidate of the party, it's necessary to appeal to an ideologically more extreme slice of the electorate. And that creates the problem for the challenger in the general election debates, in which usually the election is decided by voters toward the middle of the ideological spectrum rather than by committed ideologues. So the problem from the challenger is, how do you get the nomination in a way that doesn't make it impossible for you to come back in the debates and in the general election campaign and appeal to the middle ground? So that's the problem of the incumbent and the problem of the challenger. And I mention those because, to me, the most interesting thing about the 2012 debates is the way that those problems manifested themselves. The first two debates of 2012 upset and then reestablished the momentum of the campaign that existed before the debates. Now, just to remind ourselves, coming out of the conventions and going into September, Obama held a slight lead over Romney, not only nationally in the public opinion polls, but in most of the swing states. Going into the first debate, his lead was widening slightly in most of the swing states. The first debate of 2012 arrested that momentum because, I think, it illustrates the problem of the incumbent. For Mitt Romney, the first debate of 2012 went very well, vindicating his time-consuming and disciplined preparation. Evidence of the political benefit came quickly. 70% of the respondents to a CBS poll thought that Romney had won the first debate. And he stopped or reversed the momentum that Obama had developed in almost all of the swing states. Obama at first did not recognize that anything was amiss. In his closing statement, he proclaimed that it had been a terrific debate, but he was soon disabused of that belief. In their post-election retrospective, New York Times reporters suggested that the debate sharply exposed Mr. Obama's vulnerabilities and forced him suddenly to confront the possibility of a loss. Why the problem? Well, perhaps Obama was rusty. He hadn't participated in any debates in 4 years. He seemed inattentive, easily distracted during practice sessions. Maybe the nonverbals were off. He spent a lot of time looking down at his notes. Maybe he wouldn't seem presidential if he fought harder. Or perhaps his disdain for Romney and the hard right turn of Romney's primary campaign led him to underestimate his opponent. Well, there's widespread agreement that something went wrong for Obama, and considerable speculation about why. There's been little focus on just what went wrong. I'd like to explore that question by looking at debate skills and strategy as Obama, the incumbent, deployed them. He made at least 3 basic mistakes, in my opinion. First, he repeatedly misstated his opponent's position in that debate. Textbooks often advise that the first step in refutation is to state the opponent's position acceptably to him or her, to avoid refuting an argument that the opponent has not raised. Those of you that are having my textbook inflicted upon you will find that advice in there. In the first segment of the debate, Obama characterized Romney's economic plan as cutting taxes for the wealthy and rolling back regulations. And he persisted in that characterization even when Romney explicitly denied that that was his plan. Romney, therefore, could dismiss much of the president's criticism without answering it. Exasperated, he complained, "Virtually everything he just said about my tax plan is inaccurate." In the next segment, Obama asserted that Romney had ruled out revenue as a partial means of closing the deficit. Romney replied no, but said that new revenue would come from economic growth, not raising taxes. In the third segment, Obama characterized Romney's health care proposal as vouchers. Romney denied that too. The effect of these and other cases of misstating the opponent's position was that Obama seemed out of touch with the precise arguments in the debate. Now, in his defense, Obama was attacking positions that Romney had espoused earlier in the campaign. But now Romney was tacking back toward the center. He was trying to resolve the challenger's problem by moderating his views. Now, Obama finally caught on to this, And in later weeks, he would skillfully ridicule this shift as Romnesia, as if Romney had forgotten about his earlier views. But in this debate, with only one exception, he did not seem to notice what Romney was doing, moving back toward the center. Compounding Obama's difficulty was that he did not object when Romney misstated his position. Early in the first segment, Romney characterized Obama's approach as bigger government, spending more, taxing more, regulating more, if you will, trickle-down government. Even though moderator Jim Lehrer specifically asked Obama to respond to what the governor just said about trickle-down, Obama declined to do so. A second error. Obama was not strong in his handling of the spread. Now, permit me a technical digression for a minute. The spread is a debate term that refers to answering an argument by making multiple separate independent responses, each of them a very brief statement, often just an assertion, lasting no more than a few seconds. Now, if the original arguer is not able to reply to each of these abbreviated claims, the proponent carries the uncontested position by default. He never answered this argument or that argument. The respondent, therefore, either should say something about each claim or group these little claims and offer a response that applies to all. Now, Romney spread effectively. He started off early in the debate where he said, I have a 5-point economic program. And here's what he said. North American energy independence, opening up trade, providing people with skills and education, getting to a balanced budget, and championing small business. 5-part program. These, of course, are goals, not programs. When it came Obama's turn, though, he left Romney's plan standing, except for a comment about education, and instead referred only to his own ideas. The result was that Romney's proto-arguments carried more weight than they should have, simply because they were not answered. This happened during other debate segments as well. Now, don't get me wrong, the spread is not always a good idea. It can encourage superficiality by focusing on the number of arguments rather than their merit. This problem might justify a principled refusal to answer arguments that aren't developed, but not silently ignoring the other candidate's assertions. Obama also spread sometimes, but where Romney's points were concise and well-formed, Obama's were meandering and scattershot. In one answer during the second segment, for example, Obama referred to the Simpson-Bowles deficit reduction plan, shifting Medicare to the states, adjusting corporate tax rates, oil drilling, and other topics. Quite reasonably, Romney served notice that it would take too much time to go through such a diverse range of topics. A third Obama mistake. Besides misstating position and not responding to the spread, he let several questionable assertions go unchallenged. For example, Romney put forward this test for government spending. Is the program so critical it's worth borrowing money from China to pay for it? Obama never took issue with this criterion, even though he was calling not just for borrowing money, but for revenue increases to raise the funds needed for his program. In the same segment, Romney asserted, you'll never balance the budget by raising taxes. Obama let that pass too, which undercut his plea to combine tax increases with spending cuts. Obama also failed to respond to Romney's analogy between the United States and Spain, both of which he asserted were devoting 42% of their economy to government. He also had nothing to say about Romney's charge that he had doubled the deficit while pledging to cut it in half, nor to Romney's taunt that he should have embraced the Simpson-Bowles deficit reduction plan. Why did Obama let Romney get away with these questionable assertions? Maybe he was not paying attention, though he seemed to be taking copious notes, nor was he without time to reply. In fact, he used more of the speaking time than Romney did. But he didn't use his time strategically. He repeated answers. He spent excessive time on anecdotes and lengthy illustrations, and he offered dubious cases as precedents. Consider an example from the fourth segment of the debate. Asked why he wanted to repeal Obamacare, Romney quickly alluded to two people he'd met who said they were considering dropping their health insurance, by the way, not apparently in response to Obamacare, and then he ticked off a series of objections. Obamacare will cost more than traditional insurance, Medicare will be cut to pay for it, unelected boards will have too much discretion, and decisions should be made at the state rather than the federal level. This, by the way, was probably an attempt to preempt Obama's expected citation of Romney's Massachusetts health care plan as a precedent for the country. Now, several of these claims were questionable, but this was Romney's argument for repeal, and Obama needed to respond. But the president instead used his 2-minute reply to needlessly amplify the problem, refer to the unfortunate people with whose problems Romney had begun, and insisting that the issue was even more serious than Romney thought. This consumed 75% of Obama's allotted speaking time, and it was irrelevant, since Romney had not denied that health care funding was a serious national issue. Obama was replying as if Romney had focused on the question of whether there was a serious problem. Then, realizing that there was considerable public confusion about what the Affordable Care Act actually did, Obama proceeded to explain its points. Midway through that explanation, the moderator, Jim Lehrer, told Obama that his time was up. Protesting that he had 5 seconds left, Obama took about 30 seconds to add that the Massachusetts experience was a viable national model. Even with the additional time, Obama ended his answer having refuted none of Romney's criticisms of Obamacare. Later in the exchange, Obama finally began to grapple with the specifics of Romney's argument. But then he made another strategic mistake. He talked favorably and at length about the success of the Cleveland Clinic in reducing the cost of care. He cited it as a precedent. Romney turned the tables by pointing out that the Cleveland Clinic was private, supporting his position that free people and free enterprise trying to find ways to do things better are able to be more effective in bringing down the cost than government will ever be. Obama let that pass. Well, there were other examples of Obama's strategic and tactical weakness besides these three. And when you get to reading the first debate of 2012, you will see them. All told, it was a disappointing debate performance by the president, justifying the harsh evaluation by commentators and the judgment of respondents to the polls. And it reflected, I think, in large part, the difficulty that Obama faced as an incumbent, coming cold into debates with his challenger. The burden now was clearly on President Obama to come back. The vice presidential debate came next, and Biden's dominance of that debate provided some reassurance for Obama supporters, although his violation of decorum, sighing, laughing, interrupting, ridiculing his opponent, was also the subject of criticism. But the pressure was on the president in the second debate, in which the format shifted to a town hall. This debate was best known for two exchanges. One involved a verbal gaffe on Romney's part. the other a dispute over evidence. In the fourth exchange, a woman asked, "In what ways do you intend to rectify the inequities in the workplace, specifically regarding females making only 72% of what their male counterparts earn?" Obama spoke first. He reminded listeners that the first bill he signed as president was the Lilly Ledbetter Act, reversing a Supreme Court decision that had denied a woman equitable relief because her suit was filed too late. And then he went on to say, pay equity is not just a woman's issue. This is a family issue. This is a middle-class issue, and we've got to fight for it. When his turn came, Romney took a different tack. He did not focus specifically on pay equity. Rather, he shifted focus to affirmative action in employment. He told of trying to fill his cabinet after he'd been elected governor of Massachusetts, discovering that all the applicants were men, asking a number of women's groups to help find qualified women, and, quote, "They brought us whole binders full of women." His choice of words was particularly inept. One doesn't put women into a binder. The image was ridiculous on its face, as well as demeaning, and it easily could imply that Romney, insensitive to women, commodified them. Binders full of women became one of the laugh lines of the campaign. His response was not taken seriously, and even if it had been, it was not responsive to the question. Romney opened himself to the charge that he was not really committed to pay equity and that he was engaged in a diversion. Obama did not call Romney out for evading the question, nor did he comment on the binders full of women phrase. He did note that Romney had ignored pay equity, and then he shifted focus to the requirement in the health care law, which Romney opposed, that insurance companies provide contraceptive coverage for women. Though irrelevant to the question and connected only loosely as a women's issue, this discussion was a bonus for Obama because it came in the closing comment of an exchange, and Romney was not invited to respond. Obama prevailed in this exchange, but less because of his skillful argumentation than because of Romney's verbal gaffe. A more consequential encounter took place on the eighth question, concerning the recent attack on the United States diplomatic mission in Benghazi, Libya. An audience member asked, who was it that denied enhanced security and why? Obama evaded the specific question but offered a general review of the situation and described his actions as motivated by a desire to find out exactly what had happened. In contrast, the president said, Governor Romney put out a press release trying to make political points, and that's not how a commander-in-chief operates. Romney began his reply with a rambling expression of sympathy for the diplomats, mixed with an allegation that Obama was responsible for their fate. He then said there were many days that passed before we knew whether this was a spontaneous demonstration or actually whether it was a terrorist attack. Whether there was some misleading, you have to ask yourself, why didn't we know 5 days later when United Nations Ambassador Susan Rice mistakenly labeled the incident a demonstration? Even more troubling, Romney said, was the fact that Obama the next day attended political fundraisers instead of personally investigating what had happened. Obama switched to dialogue, addressing Romney directly. The day after the attack, Governor, I stood in the Rose Garden and told the American people that we were going to find out exactly what happened, that this was an act of terror, and I also said that we're going to hunt down those who committed this crime. The suggestion that anybody on my team would play politics or mislead, Governor, is offensive. That's not what we do. Now, a little bit of context. Republicans had criticized the president for waiting too long to announce that the attack was a terrorist act undertaken by a group with ties to the Libyan branch of al-Qaeda, and waiting because An earlier announcement would have undercut the president's claim to have weakened al-Qaeda as a result of the killing of Osama bin Laden. This was particularly an attack that was made by Republicans toward the right. It was very prominent during the primary season. By shifting to dialogue and addressing his remarks directly to Romney rather than the moderator or the public, Obama associated his opponent with these charges that he labeled offensive. Invited to make a quick response, Romney zeroed in on one point: Obama's assertion that he had gone into the Rose Garden and said that this was an act of terror. Romney maintained that this was false. Obama said to no one in particular, "Get the transcript." As though responding to this request, moderator Candy Crowley intervened, saying, he did in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror. She then acknowledged that it did as well take 2 weeks or so for the whole idea there being a riot out there about this tape to come out. Her implication was that both men were partly right. But Romney persisted in his claim that it took a long time to say that this was a terrorist act, but he then undercut his stance by asking the moderator, "Am I incorrect in that regard?" This question hurt Romney. It implied that he was not sure of his position. It implied that he accepted Crowley's authority to answer the question, and it shifted Romney into dialogue mode, but not with Obama, instead with Candy Crowley. The overall effect was not only to vindicate Obama, but to suggest that Romney did not know what he was talking about on a key matter of foreign policy. And yet, when the transcript was released in the form of a video of Obama's Rose Garden remarks, it proved to be far more ambiguous. What the president said was, "Terrorist acts will not be tolerated." Now, for those of you that study argumentation, you'll notice this could be the major premise of a categorical argument. Terrorist acts will not be tolerated. This was a terrorist attack, therefore it will not be tolerated. But it could also be seen as the major premise of a conditional argument. Terrorist acts will not be tolerated, so if this was a terrorist act, it will not be tolerated. The former interpretation supports Obama. The latter supports Romney. But as argued in the debate, the exchange clearly favored Obama. Now, if we had more time, we could go through other examples in the debate of cases where Romney misplayed his hand and created the strong impression that Obama had prevailed. The weakness of the challenger's position allowed Obama to recover from the weakness of the incumbent's position in the first debate. And after the second debate, the momentum of the campaign was back with Obama as it had been before the debates, and it stayed there throughout. This analysis suggests that the perception of an Obama comeback during the second debate is real, but is not primarily the result of his superiority in argumentation. He did display a persona which was confident, forceful, assertive, and decisive, but more importantly, Romney made a number of strategic mistakes. So we saw the problem of the incumbent and the problem of the challenger enacted in those two debates. Now, is this discussion just a case of fighting the last war? Sometimes people like me that study debates by examining their texts are accused of that. Or does it have anything to suggest about the election of 2016 in which there is no incumbent? Well, here are some things that I think it might suggest. There is an attempt that's pretty obvious to portray Clinton as a quasi-incumbent and to portray her campaign as a campaign for Obama's third term. To the degree that that succeeds, she will be put in to the incumbent position. And this is probably why Bill Clinton, in his convention speech, focused instead on Hillary Clinton's experience as a maker of change. Change versus constancy will be at issue again this year. Personal character and challenges to decorum will be in evidence as well, and how the debates fit into the ongoing campaign narrative and whether they succeed in changing it. So I suggest that as we anticipate and watch the 2016 debates, we not think of them as events that emerged out of nowhere, but rather as events that emerged out of a tradition of campaign debates and some of the general and generic problems that that tradition introduces. Thank you. Professor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zarefsky. It's a great honor to have you here. I very much enjoyed your talk. I thought it was quite informative. I want to say thanks again to you for coming. I've been a huge fan of yours, not quite as long as Dean Ulmer, but for almost as long a time. I really respect the great work that you've done in argumentation and presidential debates. I also want to thank Dean Ulmer for hosting this event here, to the UNLV Libraries for sponsoring the videotaping, and to the UNLV Presidential Debate Campus Engagement Committee for making this all possible. We have a little bit of time now for some questions from the audience, and so if folks had questions, if you would like to hold up your hands, if you wrote them down on your note cards, you can certainly do that. And I think that we have about 15 minutes following the reception. Following the question and answer period, there will also be a reception out in the lobby here. Thank you. One other quick reminder: if you are in COM 330/789 and have not yet checked in with Dr. Henry, please do so that you are counted as here. Dr. Henry is somewhere, and it's hard to see with the light. Sorry. Question one. Question one here. Okay. Can you tell us what you think, what debate format or style each of the candidates that we will see this year would be most successful at?
Well, that's a very good question, and in some ways the answer is unpredictable. This year's match is in many ways atypical. It's not unique, but you have to go back to the early 19th century to find campaigns and candidate matches exactly like this one. The thing that's probably most apparent is Mr. Trump's penchant for making statements that are harmful to his cause when he has not thought out a position or when he is provoked. So I suspect that one of the things that will happen in the debates is that Secretary Clinton will bring up a litany of those, and if Trump responds by talking about how he's moderated his positions, she'll then attack him for flip-flopping and say you don't get do-overs as president. Meanwhile, I suspect she will be trying very hard to goad him into making such statements during the debate itself. And I don't know, but it may not take a lot of goading to produce that response. Because one of the things that's clear in this campaign is that there is a constituency that has responded favorably to this kind of behavior on Trump's part. I suspect that the debates will be much more about the personal character and the ethos of the two candidates than it will be about any issues, and that we will probably see less time devoted to explicit discussion of the issues than is normally the case in general election debates.
Great, thank you. Another question, and something I've often wondered myself, why do you think that the public is so unwilling to forgive gaffes that speakers make in presidential debates? Often there are small mistakes. For instance, Perry's list of three departmental agencies, federal agencies that he would cut, and he couldn't remember one of them, or Romney's binders full of women comment, et cetera. You know, and there's a long list that many of us are familiar with. So why do you think that those have such staying power?
I think the answer to that is that the campaign is increasingly seen as scripted or canned. The sense that we're not seeing these candidates as genuine figures or people. Well, of all of the campaign events that take place, the debates are the least scripted event. They're the ones that are most likely to reveal things unintentionally. And so if you believe that these unintentional revelations are indications of what the candidate is really like when the handlers can't handle him or her, then they carry a lot more weight than they otherwise would. And this would be one of the reasons that they stick. I think a second reason would be, quite frankly, that most analyses of the debates are relatively superficial when it comes to examining what the issue positions are and what kind of stance the candidates have taken. And so it's easy to see, well, they're closely matched or one's not particularly different from the other. But what makes them different and what stands out is these moments that we call gaffes. And that would be a second reason that they get the degree of attention they do.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Another one. This question begins with great speech. I agree. So great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Whoever wrote that.
And this questioner asks, you had mentioned that Hillary might be considered an incumbent. What are some of the factors that would make her appear to be an incumbent or apply the incumbent disadvantage or problem to her?
The principal answer to that is she's been around for a long time. She's been in the public eye for at least 25 years, since she became First Lady during the Bill Clinton administration. Without interruption, she then went to the Senate and served in the Senate in a highly visible position for 8 years, and then she became Obama's Secretary of State. And it's only been in the last few years that she's not held a federal office. So I think that's the most obvious reason. The second would be that Clinton has found it to her advantage to quite explicitly identify herself with Obama in the hope that some of the president's popularity, especially among certain constituency groups, would transfer to her. Well, that's a double-edged sword. I mean, the more you identify with Obama, the more you're perceived as the third Obama term, as some Republicans are talking about it. So I think those would be the main reasons. And I do appreciate the great speech comment, especially since this was a retro lecture without PowerPoints and slides.
Well, I think everyone enjoyed it. I have one last question. I think this is a good way to cap it off. Could you please describe what you think are some of the most important skills that a candidate who is about to participate in a presidential debate can have? What are some of the most important things that a candidate can think about or do to prepare for a presidential debate?
Well, those are
one other way to say this is, if you were their debate coach, what might you tell the candidates?
Well, you know, no one's ever asked me to do that. So take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. I mean, I think the most important skills are very good listening, so that you can pick up quickly exactly what the opponent is saying and not saying, because often the devil is in the details. And an ability to think quickly on your feet so that you can summon up from your own record and your own experience the relevant comments in response. A decent sense of humor is also very important, because I think it's been demonstrated that people respond much more positively to attacks that are delivered in the form of humor than vitriol or overt kind of attack. Now, the second part of the question asked, how would you prepare? And the way most people prepare, as I think you all know, is they have mock debates with stand-ins who are designed to mimic the style and personality and so on of their opponent. In theory, that would be very useful if you can imagine that these are not just mock sessions, but really are attempts to simulate what the debate will be like. Now, you've probably noticed that Mr. Trump has announced that he does not plan to have any mock debates as part of his preparation. And we'll see if that makes any difference, and if so, what kind of a difference.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for your time and for the lecture. We all really appreciated it. Thank you very much. And if folks would like to...